Hey folks, I'd like to try to speak on proper mechanics of movement today, which that's a pretty overwhelming task in my mind. But it's come up again and again, and I'd like to address it as best as I'm able. Now, I'm not going to make this an evidence dump or a whole deep dive into what the evidence shows. I'll leave that for like the Greg Lehmans and the Nicholas Ings and the Lars Abemarys of the world. They know the evidence better than I likely ever will. What I will do is just introduce some points to consider. And maybe we can think about this a little bit critically. So I keep seeing these ads pop up on social media, and I keep seeing these courses advertised and services touted as fixing your movement, as fixing your mechanics, saying that you have an optimal posture for your neck and it should be like 30 degrees of curvature or something, or an optimal lordosis for your spine, or an optimal angle for your pelvis. And I mean, no. Sure, that's what we're taught in school, and that's very clinical and very clean and very easy. Measure angles, person doesn't meet angle, person is now pathological and needs to be fixed, and I, with my miracle hands and my miracle system and my miracle methodology, can cure them? That's not how humanity works. That's not how people work. That's weird, dirty, messy beasts. And trying to fix something to such a clean degree and in such a draconian measure is not healthcare. So let's take into consideration two key factors for this. Factor one, nervous system. Factor two, body mechanics. And when I say mechanics, I mean the mechanical infrastructure of the body over time. When I say nervous system, I mean the control system of the body over time. Okay? So, I mean, day zero, we start, baby, infinite potential. As we move, as we adapt, as we stress ourselves over time, we're changing our bodies. We're changing our nervous systems. Let's look at the nervous system first. As you move and explore, your nervous system is building synapses based on the feedback it's receiving, not based on an arbitrary set of rules, not based on an arbitrary, this is now developing to here. As that baby stresses the nervous system to control, say, cross-body abduction, their nervous system builds synapses to recognize and control and optimize movement of cross-body abduction. As they learn to visually identify their own hand as theirs, which is such a cool thing that we do, their nervous system is saying, oh, this thing, when I fire these pulses that went across my field of vision, I seem to actually have autonomy. I have control over that. Autonomy, that was the word. I forgot that word yesterday. That was so frustrating. I have autonomy. I have control over that. And that's mine. I can do things with that. And that nervous system is now forming synapses and forming control pathways and sensory pathways and essentially pathways of awareness, if you will, to say, oh, I can do these things. And this continues through life. The things you practice become the things that you can do most effectively. And if you move in such a way that is atypical to textbook, but typical to you, your nervous system is adapting to that typical to you series of movements. And that becomes optimized. And that's why we see people like Usain Bolt exhibiting a distinctly uneven gait pattern with pretty objectively fantastic results. Your nervous system is adapting to you, not the draconian measure. And so the draconian measure is not necessarily representative of you, which is a big part of why we'll see people who exhibit abnormal movement patterns with no pain, and with often optimization of that movement pattern in such a way that they have full function, full control, full strength, full awareness of acceleration, deceleration points through that movement. And our education, our classic education would say that doesn't make sense. We can look to the mechanics of it. And I know that's not a deep dive for the nervous system. I know that. There's a ton more and so much stuff that I don't know that I don't even know that I don't know it. But that's a start for now. You can go to the mechanics and think of the same thing. I mean, you're born and you start to adapt to the forces you apply on yourself. You start to toddle around and your femur starts to develop greater trabeculae in the direction of force you're exposing it to. Your patellas become more robust based on the amount of load they're bearing. And this, again, continues throughout a lot of your life. I mean, at least until you start to break down more over time, per unit time, but I mean, that's a different thing entirely. And so as you stress yourself, you're stressing those soft tissues and those hard tissues to adapt to that stress, assuming you allow them to adapt. And now your mechanics actually are changing. So I might treat a fencer. I might see an Olympic level fencer in my clinic. Do they have fencing in the Olympics? I'm a sports injury therapist. I should know this. Wow. But a high level fencer in my clinic. And I might be doing measurements of, say, upper limb diameter or upper quad diameter and find that the upper leg on the dominant side is 3/4 of an inch, 2 centimeters larger in diameter than the other side. But that's normal for them. Might do a standing forward bending test and see a demonstrably asymmetrical rise of each posterior superior iliac spine with no associated symptoms. You might see what I subjectively was taught to call a sacral torsion or a left on right torsion, an off-axis torsion in standing forward bending or extension. And there's no problem with that for them because that's the way that they're built and that they move and that they've adapted to their physical stresses over time. Muscles have hypertrophied, bone density has increased, that person is that mechanical person now, and their optimal movement has to be reflected through expression of movement through that frame that's uneven. And so we don't have any set of, again, draconian measure that works for them. And that, you might say that's like a little bit on the extreme side, that's someone who's harped on that single-sided movement pattern for decades. What about someone who's left-handed? What about someone who throws regularly, or someone who always kicks with the same side? What about someone who always lays on the same side? What about someone who always lifts their heavy bag with the same arm? We will see asymmetric development over time. This is normal. It's much more normal to see asymmetry than to see symmetry in general populace, in cadaveric research, in medical imaging. We're just not bilaterally built. And we're certainly not bilaterally adapted. And so when we start trying to get to the idea that there's an optimal movement pattern, there's an optimal static posture, when we start getting into these, we're wrong. When we start buying into that, we're wasting our money. That's a modality empire. That's business. That's marketing. That's not healthcare. I know I sound kind of preachy right now. I'm really sorry for that. I'm not trying to be. But I'm a little frustrated right now because I see so much of this. And I see so much available, crystal clear, critically thought out evidence. And yeah, it's messier. Yeah, it's more challenging. Yeah, it's harder to say with each individual human who comes into your clinic, I'm going to treat you as an individual human coming into my clinic, and I'm going to try to assess you for you and address you for you and work with what I've got here and explore what works best with you and empower you, rather than to say, I have this chart, or I have this grid I want you to stand in front of, or I have this laser grid pattern I can stand you in front of and scan you. Those are really clean and easy. No thought. Just follow the instructions. Some assembly required. Those are really simple, but they're not accurate. They're not very helpful. And for someone like me, who's an outlier because of, say, hypermobility disease or an absolute metric buttload of fractures, that's harmful. That's doing damage. That's emotionally and mentally disempowering a human being, and that's physically potentially traumatizing or injuring that human being to try to fit them into that mold. We've not only not helped that person, we've actively harmed them through either willful or unknown ignorance. So yeah, I guess that's my take on that. It's great business, sells well, markets well, looks really pretty on video and on film and everything, but it's not how humans move. And it's not how healthcare should reflect that. Thanks very kindly.